Hello there. Here we have another one of Beach's, well, this is made in Korea actually. This is a Vesta. Sorry, I've got something. Chesty cough. Just come out into this cold shed. This is a Vesta stage series, and I've had a couple of these before. In fact, my stepson's got one in the house, which has sort of been amongst friends and family for years. He's got the PRS style one, and this is their Tele style. Electrics are all a bit cranky. It's quite nice sounding. Needs some spraying in there. Strings are dead. So it works. It's just a bit, yeah, in need of a bit of a refresh in the wiring department. God, dust. It's light. It's a light-bodied creature, which is good. It has a serial number on the back, which is 95766, on a nice Vesta, Vesta logo thing. It's in this TV yellow colour. Come on, heat this. Fighting to get beyond 7 degrees. Yeah, nice sort of TV yellow. And the distinctive thing about this, really, actually the only major distinctive thing about this is the contour of the headstock, which I've seen before somewhere, I can't think where. It's completely rounded off here, and I quite like that. It reminds me of something, maybe it's an old Vesta, but it's a very deliberate choice. Instead of following the sort of square edge, it gets, how well you can see it in this light, but it gets rolled off the whole headstock edge. But it's quite a nice touch, very distinctive. Basic budget tuners. So there isn't anything kind of flash about this guitar, but actually, really, it's not a bad start point. It's going out of tune all over the place. There's a nice grain on the fingerboard. Frets are quite low, but they were presumably fairly vintage style to begin with. It's got a metal string tree here, which is clamped right down on the ground, which is it's quite extreme. I guess the original Vesta pickups, and actually this to me looks like a good clean-up. Maybe, well, I'm not going to fret level. I'm going to polish the strings, but I'm going to see what happens when we reduce the action here. It's up quite high, so it might be hiding a multitude of sins. I mean, there isn't an awful lot of downward adjustment for a start, so yeah, we're kind of at the floor there. Yeah, so that's the first problem. We're constrained by the neck to heel joint. So I think we're going to have to put in a little shim under there to give us back some action adjustment up here, because it's too high even still. So let's start out by doing that, because there's no point getting into any of the other setup details. So I decided on this one not to do a massive amount of complicated things. Oh, hello, you're right up there for a change. Probably should be looking downwards a bit more. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we're not going into refretting or anything like that with this. In fact, we're not even going as far as anything such as fret leveling, because I'm hoping these will be worn smooth enough over time. The reason I'm not considering fret leveling is because the frets are pretty old. I think we'll be struggling to get any more life out of them, you know, and then you're into the requirement for a refret down the line. So what I'm looking for is I'm going to make myself a little shim. Now this is really thin. but we'll see how well it works even being so thin. So it's a little piece of copper, which is about I think it's about 0.2. I'll double check it. I'm just going to tailor it round to the back of the pocket a little bit, if I can get there with my scissors. Just curve that off so it will fit in without hitting anything. Get those offcuts to the floor so we can hoover them up, vacuum them up later. Just a quick check on this. I think it's about 0.2. Oh, it's not even that. It's a 1/10 of a mil. Okay, that's a really fine one. I wonder if there's something else we have in here. I mean, we could do 2 of these, or we could find a bit of tin that does a similar thing. There's no point putting too little under. Okay, it's 0.2. That's not a bad size. Let's try that one to begin with. If we go too small, oh come on, would you? Off. If we go too small, then we're just not going to get any lift, and it will just have to redo it. So I'm going to just excuse me, dustified, mark up the shape I'm after roughly, approximately. I haven't even started, and I've chucked things on the floor. It's the cold, I tell you. I spent all of this morning taking my dad to the dentist again for some more fairly major work. And it's not. I'm glad to be able to do that, because he's needed to do it for a long time. The difficulty is it's just the preparation and getting the powered wheelchair ready, and then finding a place to park, and then getting him out and down the hill to a low curb, a dropped curb, and then back up and into the dentist, and then getting into the dentist chair, which is very difficult for somebody who's very handicapped. Anyway, we did it, and he sat through. He lay back through an hour of this stuff, bless him. But he got through it, and we got done. So that was this morning, and then on the way back, I stopped in town to get a load of plywood to make some more templates, because I've got a routing session on the horizon sometime soon. And so I had to make. I've got quite a few templates to make, so I had to go and get those. I'll get the material for it. Set on 4. This has got little cracks like you'd expect on the Tele or Strat type of neck fitting. Power fading. Oh dear. Yeah, so that was kind of an early start to get him down to the dentist. He hasn't got many teeth left, bless him. We paid a lot of money to save the ones he's got. Right. So the first thing I'm going to look at is, just out of curiosity. Come on, out. Anything existing in there? No, there's no pre-existing shims. So I'm going to put this tin one in the back there, and we'll see. This is a plywood body. well, light plywood. How did they manage that? It's from the oh Lord, from the Korean era of plywood. Squire went down the Korean plywood route as well. I'm just going to put that back together, just long enough really to check the uplift and see if we've got the action jump. Yeah, so a bit of a funny day, and I also, while I was out at the dentist, Claire made sure 2 guitars went off in the old parcel force. It's not even that much really, is it? Do you know, that's I think we're just about there. Yeah, I won't put any more than we absolutely have to, but we've got there with the amount we've got into. So as little shimmery as possible. Somebody's lost its juice. Right, that's going on charge right now. You can't be without that. And that's not charging because it must not be plugged in. Holy caramba. Well, that is plugged in. It is charging. Sorry, I just come in here and I've got dusted up. So the start point for this for me is to get an action, a decent action, and let's test the frets. Okay, so that's under normal tension. Let's now go down to the lowest action we can get, which is about there. I mean, I might just look at this and say, do you know what? No, that's well, it's just over a fraction over 1.5, which is you might argue that for a Telecaster is about right. I don't know. Let's start. We could slightly increase it in a minute, but let's start with it, and then let's see how the thing plays. If we get everything down to match, or thereabouts. Okay, we're on the floor there. Okay, as I thought, pretty good for, you know, because it's old. One of the plus sides of having worn out frets is they're very often worn smooth, so that any high spots are taken down by nature, if you like. So that's a good start. It's a little still a fraction higher than I would go, but it's not bad. This thing is not staying in tune, so the nut isn't right, and I'm going to have a closer look at that now. But started out with as low an action as we can set with this added bit of shimming. So let's see what the relief is doing. Very little, but it's in the, well, it's in the sort of 0.2 zone, which is cool. The first fret action looks pretty good on here. My only thought is it's sticking at the moment, so it's not working the way I would want. And the deal is I'm either going to free it up, or if it doesn't cut right, I'm going to replace it with a bone one. But we want 0.3 across here, so let's just start as we mean to go on. Am I missing something? Funnily enough, I appear to be missing a 40. Has it got stuck in here somehow? No. That's weird. Oh no, that's the 42. I can't count. Okay, so let's drop these out first and have a look. Okay, with the lowered action, we're actually below the limit there. Let me just see what this is made of. Have a quick sample. Might be bone. That could well be bone, but it's a fraction low. See what it actually comes in at. Sorry, God, I hate it when I come into a place with dust and it gets me. Okay, so that's 25. That's the lowest we could get away with, but it's the slot is too deep for starters, which is causing it to stick. So the first thing I'm going to do, even if we stick at this 0.25, I'm going to want to widen this. And I don't know if you can't see from there, but it is really, it's a really deep slot because somebody's cut the slot nice and deep to get the action right. But it's much deeper than it needs to be. So one of the things you can do is you can file away to widen it up, and then afterwards we can reduce the rest of the nut above the string, basically, because it absolutely doesn't need to be sticking up this high. So I'm just getting it to where I'm just looking at this. I get that feeling that I don't know if I'm going to fight this all the way. Excuse me. Let's see what we've got here. We've got a nice tusk replacement nut. I think I'm going to go for that. This is probably worth it, I have to say. I don't want to fight this and end up with too low an action. It's just counterproductive. We're having to cut the whole thing down, and there's going to be a whole load of work involved. This is, 10 quid cost, but if it reduces the amount of work required to get this to play properly, and it leaves it with a better quality nut at the end of it, then kind of there's a good argument for doing it, regardless of the cost. Let's have a look down there. Yeah, it's a hard plastic, hence the sheared off part. But staying where you are. Doesn't want to come out that bit. It has snapped for good. We've got a little bit of the plastic left in the bottom, which we can dig out fairly easily. just slack these off so they're kept out of the way. Just need them to last long enough to get the nut slots correct. There you go. There's the pesky bits. Now we need this to fit in, which it probably won't straight away, so I'm going to give it a very small amount of sanding. Nearly there. Thank you. I can't quite see the overall depth of it, so I don't want to ram it in too tightly so that I can't then get it out and adjust it if we need to make it a little higher. If it's starting out too flat or too low in the slot, that's a better fit. Okay, now with this it's actually excuse me, it's fairly easy to increase the height if we need to. Should be nice and flat along there, which it is. Everything in there should be nice and flat. There shouldn't be any rocking backwards and forwards. No, that's better. Right. Now it's interesting that this nut may well actually be too low even still for this. Yeah, that's funny that. So the slot's inherently too deep. So to use this nut we would have to shim the thing. Now, a couple of ways of doing this. You can either add something to the bottom of it. Sometimes, if I find a useful piece of bone, I add it to it. Although it's slightly different colour to the tusk, I won't have any leftover tusk. We've got a round radius one here. Probably a tighter radius actually, all said and done, and that happens to be a left-hander, so we can't use that. Then there's a standard sort of bone one there which we can use. I quite like the idea of using this one since I've got it to exactly the right thickness now. So there's a bit of a tilt there, something's still in the way. I can't exactly feel what it is. It shouldn't be this, because that should be dead flat along the bottom, manufactured in the factory. So it's a case of just making sure there's nothing stuck in the corners of here. It could be, there is a little bit, which I didn't see. Okay, that will sit nicely in there. So as it stands, as it sits, that's too too tall, short. So like I said, sometimes I will add a bit of spare bone from somewhere, glue it to it and then sand it back. Something like this, but obviously it's not enough. I wonder if I could do it in 2 bits, but it's far too high. Well, the alternative is to add a little bit of white plastic under there, if you have such a thing, which again, I don't always. There's a very thin, actually that might be a perfect little lift. So there's a little thin slice of bone. You could actually stick that to there and then cut that down. I think that's what I'm going to do. It's not often I find a perfectly cut bit like that. Different materials, but we're just making a footing and we could use anything really, but obviously if it's white then it's closer to the tusk. It won't look at all bad, especially since we'll actually take down quite a lot of it. There'll be hardly any left. It'll be, I mean, we could even, realistically, we could probably lift up this high enough by just putting some silver, what's that stuff? Silver sticky tape, which I sometimes use, but that's a perfect little lift. Right, wrong one. But yeah, I like to do the bone lift and then sand it back, because it gives us a nice opportunity to get it to exactly where we want it, and also it looks part of the deal. You know, if you use something like adhesive silver foil, it's really handy for increasing, you know, making a shim for something like this, but it doesn't quite, you know, sometimes you just end up seeing a little bit of it, which can be annoying. Now this is now not really going to want to stick. I'll just try and get it make some sort of connection for the time being. And maybe we'll lift it up on its edge if it will collaborate with us. Lift it on its edge. Lift it on its edge, thank you. And then press down and hope that sticks. Well, it did, despite my efforts. So, and the other thing, if you do have any of that accelerator stuff, which I've got around somewhere, you can take this out of the way and spray some accelerator on it just to help the process along. If there's nothing else, it will stop it being kind of sticky to the fingers. So there we have our slightly booted nut, which we then get to do a sanding process. It's starting out slightly thinner than the actual tusk nut, which is fine too. So we'll just clean up the excess glue on this face. Nice. Same on the back. We want it to fit pretty much straight back into that slot. Yep. Nice. Now we've got a little extra bit here that's going to take a while to carefully sand down, whilst holding the whole thing together. And then the thing is, as you get closer to the end, you want to be careful then that this thing ends up lining up flush with the end of that, which it almost nearly does. And then we have a nice fit there. You'd hardly be able to tell. I mean, you can sort of see it's a bit more translucent, the bone. Just making a nice fit. And again, lovely and flush with that other end. So you'd never know that wasn't part of the same thing. Now obviously the bottom part here is now quite a bit too high, so you can start by leveling it down on the rough stuff, and then really the game after that is just to check, drop it in the slot, which will now, I know it will fit. That's way too high, so we can see that we've got about 1 millimetre and so of bone here, and we're going to take quite a lot of that away, so we can use the rough stuff here and be quite aggressive with the removal amount. Obviously at this point we're just watching to keep the line, keep the angle 90 degrees, and if we're wandering off, then we can always come back and tilt it slightly to get it back onto its correct axis. And then if we get closer to the right height, we can stop and just double check, triple check, and then we can switch to the finer stuff and make sure we can get right down to the correct depth using this finer stuff as well, but it takes longer, obviously. So we can drop that in there, and we can see straight away we put our strings in, we're way too high. That's fine, we sort of know that. The amount of extra we needed on this was very, very small, so we can really keep going quite some way. Of course we don't want to take it all away, so we have to just keep an eye on that we do leave some in there. What I'm trying to avoid doing is cutting the slots, if possible, to get away without cutting the slots on the ready factory cut tusk nut. That would be the best outcome, because factory cut slots are much better than doing your own. So much better if we can get down to the correct sort of height without needing to go down in the slots. Sometimes your fingers get left behind. Right, so getting very close to where it is. I'm just trying to see which side has more or less sticking up, so I need a bit more taking off the treble side of things. So I'm going to put a little bit more pressure on there than elsewhere. Let's have a look at that. In you go, my friend. That looks pretty good. Let's just have a feel. Now, if doing this by eye effectively is always going to be hit and miss. You can't get to a precise first fret action by sucking it and seeing it like that. You can get close, but it's very difficult. Even if you're using a micro gauge, you know, a vernier caliper, to know exactly when you need to stop is very, very tricky. So we can get close. This isn't too bad. This one's a little bit high, but we can cut that one with a file anyway. It's not too much of a problem. Come on, out you come. Come on. Okay, it's not far off at all. There's a little bit of unevenness here and there, but I think that for where we're going to likely to get to, that's as good as we're going to get. So I'm going to glue this in place now, and then we're going to very carefully adjust downwards any of the slots that aren't quite right. But we're very close. But we'll still get the tusk, benefit of the tusk on the nut, and there you go, with a little microscopically thin boot added to that to help it lift it up a tiny bit. Missed. Oh, I keep getting the wrong one. Okay, so I don't need much to hold this in place, but just a little small amount, and it's quite difficult to get it to go in without it hitting either side because it's such a narrow slot, so if it's going to hit anywhere, let it hit the back. And wipe that off if you have to. So into there we go. Line it up as slick and close to the line as we need, and then get the middle ones in first, and then put them under load. And then the other ones in to hold the thing down. Okay. So, new nut, much better quality fitted. I'll tune back up. Right, just give these a bit of a pull. The main thing is having it under tension. It's the tuning isn't the important part here. It's just being under load. So the next part is we go back and we get the right, we'll get rid of that, we'll go back to point 3 and we'll start on the base side outwards. That one's almost exactly on the mark, don't touch, leave as. Technically could have got that one. See, this one's slightly lower. So that's a funny thing about these. Maybe, sorry, slightly higher. Maybe they've got a little gradient in here that I don't use. It's quite a steep one actually. I would have a little bit less than that, so I will take it down, but not by much. Makes it dirty. That's the only shame about these things. Very close. Sometimes these look like they've worn out. Done their service. Now, the thing about tusk is it doesn't cut as dependably as bone does. So because it doesn't cut as dependably, what you find is you run the risk of cutting it differently, and then when you have to put more pressure onto it, and then it runs the risk of over cutting very easily, and I hate that because you can you can very quickly lose overcut the nut, and then you're in starting again territory. So all that work we just did there to get this to the right size would be wasted. I'm leaving that right there. I think this will be right on the mark, or barely below the mark. Nothing to do with that. This will be a fraction higher. I think what we're seeing there is this is a flatter radius nut than the neck itself. That's all it's showing. It's no surprise really. Okay, so we're going with fraction over on that one. It just doesn't want to cut. Pretty close. Just going to do is a tiny little whiff of this just to open the slot. Avoid the risk of it choking or friction dragging it. Looks just right. And finally, that's quite a bit higher, courtesy of a different radius. And I'm going to do a bit of this first. Quite precise and very easy at this stage to overcut if you're not careful. On the mark. About on the same mark as the other ones. Right, so there we have it. Okay, we're done. Next step is put these away in their special overhead compartment. And next step will be to remove these strings and then we'll have a look at whether we add something slightly thicker. I might have some brass, if not I'll leave it as it is because it's not bad. We've got tied on strings here which I hate, as you know, so I'm going to just cut those off. No, that one's alright, that one's tied on. Get rid of these and then just basically give it a clean, but we'll get under here and give this a good clean out as well. This is just totally gnarled up, there's no way of getting that off without cutting it. Same with that one. But the number of people that do this in the belief that it somehow stabilises the tuning, which it doesn't. So it just does that, catches it, locks it all up, cuts my finger and then shoots it off into the distance, which is very annoying. See, this is what you can really do without having to try and pull this apart in such a way that somebody's going to get, or the wood is going to get a dent or something. It's all too easy to dent it, scrape it while you're trying to dig things out like this. I mean, who needs to be doing this to a bird's nest of crap? So please, players, don't do it. Or you'll end up with scrapes in your headstock. I'm sorry, You make it impossible to get things on. Look at this. I'm just in a tangled mess here. Can't actually get far enough onto there to cut it off. It is an absolute bird's nest here. Look at this. Goodness sake. I really do detest it. I guess it's if it's your own guitar and you want to spend hours trying to untangle it each time you come and change the strings, then be my guest. But my God, it doesn't make it easy for people like me. Fume, curse, fume, curse. Right, so the plan with this is going to be to take everything apart, or take the electrics apart and have a spray clean, and then clean everything else. And then I'm going to polish the the frets using the fret rubber, clean all this goo off, just give it a general clean. I mean, this is a bit grubby, so are these. Those are clean enough, they are what they are. They're never going to be more than budget tuners, simple as that. The problem we have is down here with these pickups, with the wiring, sorry. So we need to get a look in here. Lovely, cheapest components. There's a solder sticking around. Bit of movement. Unless I can get these off, then I can't really tighten that up anymore. But so we want to get a bit of cleaning going on under there. Now, in the absence of knowing what this finish is on here, what I ideally would like is to just try and keep as much of this sort of stuff off the paint as possible. But obviously knowing that we've got to shoot it around a bit under here. When you've got gungy, crackling pots, you really have to turn them as well as spray them. Just spraying them alone won't help. You need to turn them, especially while the spray is in there. If it's going to do any good, you want to get the mechanical metal surfaces whizzing backwards and forwards against each other in order to regain contact. Otherwise it'll clag up again. And you can actually clean your own crackly pots just by operating them without any spray if you haven't got any. That's one way around it. And then if you can, soak up any excess that's floating about and then let it dry as much as it will. So that's that. Now with a bit of luck we should hear less in the crackling department. Yep, very little. A little bit left in this one. difficult to actually get access to any of the moving parts in one of these. Okay, so that's as good as it's going to get pots wise. So there's nothing wrong with them, they work. We should put them back in there, tuck them away. Now interestingly, we've got a spare lead dangling off here. Now, did I say that this one had a bit of buzz? I think I might have said it did, and I think that's because the bridge wire has come undone. So let's just give it a look and see. Yeah, the ground wire for the bridge has been snapped off. Okay, so that's fair enough. I mean, the thing is, while we're at it, let's drop this out because we can clean this bridge now. Go the right way. No, the right way. Fool. Hey, caught them. 3 springs. Okay, so yeah, definitely plywood. Cool, eh? So we have one incredibly mucky bridge, but we can take that apart, give it a good, well, don't have to take it apart, just give it a good clean out, which would be hard to do with the pickup still in there. And if we want to, we can take these bits out. All we need to know is where, roughly where the intonation point is. You can do that. If you need to, you can do that with a little piece of paper. But in reality, since we're going to re-intonate it anyway, once we put new strings on, it's really not that critical that we mark it. But in case you want to, stick a bit of paper on there, get a pen, and just mark what we're looking at. This is the top of the E string, the kind of apex of the E saddle, E and the B. So then we can take these off. And we'll stick them over in their respective pairs. And just give it a clean, might as well. I mean, the thing is, this is a road-worn guitar and it's never going to look new, but that's not the point. It can certainly look shinier than it does at the moment. You can see how grubby this fingerboard is. Not sure it's cleanable up completely. So what we'll do is let's get a bit of solvent on here just to get some of the grime out. These thinners are extremely good for just shifting grease, amongst other things, but ground on grime instead of just firing straight in with the chrome polish or anything like that. You can really get a good job done with a bit of cellulose thinners. Paint stuck to there or something. Okay, down there. Okay, well that's as much as I'm going to clean it, and that's as much as I'm going to use that for any cleaning purposes. It's just it's not very finish friendly, so I'm going to get a clean bit of this cloth. Note to self: buy more. Using it with some Coleman cooking fluid. Note to self: always need a spare one of these knocking around. And this is now the sort of general clean up of the finish on top. It's looking pretty good actually. It's not badly looked after. This is taking off any bits. The scratches. There's a lot of grime on this. I mean, it's an old, well played guitar. No doubt about that. And the pickguard, for example, will never look new. But the whole thing is looking a bit fresher. I'll leave that there because we'll need more of it. With regards to the top of this one, it's never again going to look clean. It's a black pickup. Let's get these back in here. Don't forget we're gonna glue, solder that earth wire to ground. We're going to get it to ground. Now, when you when you take these things off and you're going to put them back on, if you've already bottomed them out and the legs are sticking through a lot, which in this case they're not, but if they are, take them down so that you can get your entry point of the screw. You can reach down to where the screw is going through here, otherwise you'll be struggling to get the two to match up without trying to bend this one up. Okay, there's my start point. Now, and these, they happen to be mostly down on the ground anyway, as far as where they're set, so there isn't a lot sticking out. But even if they're not, just make sure you set them as low as possible on their stalks. Otherwise, you'll be struggling to meet this screw, make this screw meet the hole. I mean, you can sort of bend it up a bit like that by hand, but you kind of have to hope that you get a bite. Which you can, it's good. And we want to step back a little bit. There's no compensation in these. This is three pairs of two, and they're never going to be right on, man. So something's always going to be out. It's always going to be a compromise, intonation wise. The Wilkinson do a brass one which has compensation built into the barrels, which is pretty useful. Okay, so I put a stagger in there, which actually wasn't there before, funnily enough. And now we've got the slightly amusing part of getting this back into here. And the difficult bit is getting this through there and there, into there and so on. And it becomes quite a task, can be quite a task. So here we have, I think we have our two thingies, and we're going to put that one on there and that one on there. They're going to go through there and hopefully not go anywhere else. So stay there. Hopefully. Right, first thing I didn't do is make sure that was through. Right, it is now. So that's great. We've got two of those taking hold, but this one is very can be a difficult one to get in, but it's playing ball. While you're doing this, you've always got to keep an eye out for the very fine wires sticking out where my fingers are. Oh right, that's not going in, is it? Oh, because I've come out the hole again. Hold on, here you go. Get through, thank you. Okay, that'll do for now. Just make sure that's all good. That's all good. Right, so we have a problem here with this one snapped off, or certainly not earthed to anything, and it needs to be because it's the bridge earth. So we'll take hold of some solder. Hey, solder. And we will load up some solder on a pot here that we can use to anchor this one. There you go, my little friend. Come along. Cooperate, please. Thank you. And we'll put a little bit of blob on here if we can. We'll play ball. Yeah. And then we'll attach this to here. Like so. And there we have that bridge now regrounded. So we gently fit all the bits back in. And then we will anchor the bridge back down. Okay, so they're going into plywood, and actually they're not gripping, they're coming towards the end of their grippiness. Well, it's not them, it's the plywood. Plywood gets mushy after a while when you screw things into it, so it's doing its best to hold on to that bridge screws. There's enough force to keep it there, but any more than, you know, any more ins and outs, and that would start to get start to worry about its attachment. Okay, so here's an interesting bit, right? We don't know what's going to happen with this fingerboard now, so if I just start by looking to clean it a bit, for all I know, the finish could come off at this point in my hands. It might not clean up at all, and as it happens, I think a lot of I can see the finish has been worn off up here. So we'll be able to remove some grime, but actually we're not really getting to clean the fingerboard because it's sort of worn out. It's not a bad thing. It adds to the vibe and the mojo and all of that, but it has worn, the lacquer has worn, or the poly has worn through quite some time ago. So just really getting the surface grime out from up against the frets at the moment, just that they're, you know, cleaned out for Beech's hands, sort of a sanitary kind of consideration really, as much as anything. It just feels like trace of the previous owner's been removed. sanitized for your protection. But yeah, it certainly doesn't look new. But it's not a problem. There's a lot of grime coming off, that's for sure. I mean, it's been a well played and well liked guitar, which is why it's got such a nice feel to it. Or it's been well played because it has such a nice feel. You get what I mean. Sometimes the two, it's hard to say which comes first. The playability or the playing. Yeah, I mean, that's a fair bit of shite, as they would say in England. Right, let's give this a sort of quick going over. Again, I don't want to try and do too much to this because it's got a natural vintage, the word is silkiness about it. But I do want to get in all of these bits and give it as nice a dust over as possible. Like I say, the next bit will be to polish out the frets with the fret rubbers. You know, normally I would, or ideally, I would like to level frets on a guitar if it needs it, but this one, thanks to it being worn, nicely worn over the ages, it doesn't need it. But even if it did, the frets are too low really, and it just wouldn't feel good taking any life off frets that this well worn. Okay, well, there's quite a bit of goo that's come off there. Surprising amount really. And then we have much more cleaned up. So the next part, just let's check something. I don't think I've got, may or may not have. Oh, I have. Look at this. Bargain day, Mr. Beach. Special customer. You get a special tusk string tree instead of this metal horror. Yes, I know this is period correct and all the rest of it, but the tusk string tree is a much better a much more string friendly and tuning friendly device. Let's have a look. Can we get, will it do it with this one? Let's check. I think so. Yeah, it's possibly lower than I would originally have liked it, but it's higher up. It's higher than the metal one was. But yeah, so that's good. I didn't know I had those. I have to get some more in. My nice little special sweets. My sweet jar is running low. There you go, nicely lined up. Okay. Okay, so next part of the thing is fret polishing, and again, this isn't going to be highly sophisticated. It's just going to be with the finer of the rubbers, fret rubbers. Just going to get rid of any surface goo and give this a bit of a shine up, and that will just be all the way up and down for each fret, so on. So what I'll do is I'll just disengage for this point here, and I'll come back when that's done, when I'm restrung and ready to intonate, and we'll be nearly there with this one. See you in a minute.